Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Faith. This is a podcast that's put on by the Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. And today I have the great pleasure of being with my good friend, Christian Opitz.
Hello.
Hello,
Great to
Christian.
be here. Great to be here.
I'm glad that we can connect. And I've known you for maybe a decade.
Oh,
Maybe.
seems about right. Yeah.
But there's some people listening to this who probably don't know you. So why don't you tell us a few things about yourself?
Well, my name's Christian. I'm 18 years old, freshman in college right now, going to school for film. Love working with video. That's my main thing. I play a lot of video games, and I'm interested in psychology and mental illnesses and stuff. So that's my main thing. I'd say is film, and then.
What got you into film?
Well, I uploaded my first video to YouTube on December 31st, 2011. I remember the day. And then it was like some like Minecraft video or something.
You got like 7 likes, and you knew.
I got 1 like, I think. And
12 views.
Yeah, and I don't know. Just ever since then, I liked sharing stuff, sharing videos on the internet, and then from that, I got better at editing videos, and now just I've been editing for probably 6 years in professional software, and I feel really comfortable with that, and that's what got me into it.
Yeah.
Funny enough.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're definitely a very creative person. Another hat that Christian wears, and that this kind of is in the stream of film and TV, is that Christian's actually the host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire every now and then.
That's right, Bible edition. At the Operation Onesimus Bible camp that I go to every year, I like to run the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game night,
complete with sound effects.
Oh yeah,
dim lights. And prizes.
And whenever Matt's there, he likes to sing along to the music in the background. I love that. Makes it all the more intense.
Christian and I lived in Virginia for a number of years. And Christian, you're originally from Virginia.
Right. Yeah. I live in Virginia in Charlottesville. Just came up here to Jersey for school. Mm-hmm. But Virginia will always be my home.
Yeah.
That's where I met Matt. The Richmond Chapel.
Yeah, I've had the great opportunity of getting to know you and know your family. And one thing that has really been a central tenet, or maybe a core thread in our relationship, and I think in some of our most profound conversations, has been around mental health. Mm-hmm. And that was something that when we started talking about sitting down and having a conversation, that's something that really kind of spoke to you as far as wanting to kind of have a conversation about mental health, and maybe shining a light for people who might not have ever experienced any sort of mental health conditions, or maybe have a loved one with a mental health concern, but cannot necessarily relate from a first-person perspective. We talked about having a conversation about bringing some of that to life, and bringing lived experience with mental health, either in our own life or in the lives of people that we dearly love, into the arena of faith, and how faith intersects with that, and how faith comes and goes, or is a great source of strength, or how faith kind of is involved in that. So I think that's the direction where our conversation is going to go. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, I guess I will ask you this kind of opening question into the topic, which is, tell me a little bit about your experience with mental health.
Right. So with me, I would say spirituality does play a big role with my mental health in general, and I have a mood disorder called cyclothymia, which is a mild form of bipolar disorder. So just the way that the mood cycles from like a low depression into a elevated mood, hypomania. Both of those different, and then anxiety plays a big part too, but both of those mood episodes, spirituality plays a big role in both of them, and in different ways. And I think a lot of people have experienced depression, and a lot of people can relate to feeling kind of like, inadequate in those times spiritually. And that's something that I kind of wanted to go into. And it can be tough, and it's really nice to have other people that have experienced similar things, and just people understanding what goes on inside my head. I like to open up about it to people personally. That's really just been something within the past year for me, though, because I'm at the age where disorders like that are on set. So I'm still really getting used to it and everything, and I don't know everything about it, about how it affects me. It's been a big learning experience about myself, especially spiritually.
So you mentioned a couple things, and when you were talking that I kind of want to go back to, and one is you put this word of inadequacy in with the experience of depression. For somebody who has maybe never experienced depression, or for somebody who hasn't thought about adding a spiritual lens or seeing that experience with a spiritual mindset, can you talk a little bit more about what that feels like?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I normally like to describe it scientifically is because I think that helps people understand a little better what depression is a decreased amount of dopamine in your brain. And then what hypomania is, which would be the other side for me with cyclothymia or bipolar, is an increased amount of dopamine. So it's kind of like opposites. And so with the depression side of it, personally, I often feel like, I'm constantly beating myself up over things that I feel like I'm not doing right spiritually. And I don't often think about the grace and forgiveness, the constant grace and forgiveness that God has for me. And instead, I focus on everything that I do wrong and all of my sin. And I kind of wallow in that and dwell within that, and it's very emotional, and in a way it is spiritually connecting, because I feel an emotional connection to God through that feeling. But at the same time, I don't let Christ carry my burden, and instead I lay it all on myself, and it's all just a feeling of just I'm not good enough.
You brought up this kind of paradox in your experience, in that it sounded like you were describing like yourself in like a black hole, maybe, like very unable to see outside of your mistakes, and unable to see you mentioned the grace and the forgiveness that's around you. I think you talked kind of in an at all times kind of way, and you mentioned how you don't let Jesus carry that burden. Right. But you also mentioned feeling connected.
Yeah.
So that's tell me more about that.
Right. I figured that might be confusing. How could I explain that? So I think what it is just not only the fact that in a depressive state, it's all very emotional. I'm just full of emotions, of negative emotions. And so with those emotions comes kind of if you're like reading a passage from the Bible and it's so beautiful that you cry, right? That's all, I think a lot of people have had that experience.
Could you give us an example?
Like I've even before I ever had symptoms of cyclothymia, I was, or of depression, anything like that. I remember reading in Revelation just, kind of like the imagery of like the throne and, that idea. And I just remember I was in such an emotional state for, whatever reason it was. It just made me feel very connected and emotional. It's like, this is what I want, So just the fact that in depression, it's by nature emotional, that sort of creates a spiritual connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you saying...
And also just because my thoughts revolve around the fact that I feel inadequate spiritually, because my thoughts are revolving around that also kind of feeds into it. It's not an accurate thought process that I go through, that I'm not good enough for God.
Yeah.
You know, that's not an accurate thought process, but it's emotionally connecting still. You know, that's the way I perceive it.
When you're describing this like emotional connection at moments in time when you feel incredibly inadequate, your faith sounds very like visceral and like primal almost. It's like this like really dark but deep rooted sense of connection.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's just growing up in the environment that I have, just, you know, I'm going to, you know, meeting every weekend and for my entire life and everything. It's so deeply rooted within me that, you know, luckily that doesn't go away during a depressive episode. And while and I can go into how it's very heightened, you know, the opposite during when I'm amped up, and it's very, you know, it's like a very, very spiritual, in a positive way, experience. It doesn't go away when I'm in a depressive episode because of how deeply rooted it is in me, I think, is a big reason for that. I'm finding it to be kind of, you know, difficult to explain to somebody that might not have experienced something like this. But I think it's just the fact that it's a very emotional experience in a depressive episode, and I think that just the fact that it's emotional is what makes it more spiritual in some ways.
Okay, so we talked about depression a little bit. We'll probably come back to it.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a question. When you're feeling depressed, do you feel like hopeless? Is that something that you feel?
Right. Yeah. That is definitely an aspect to it. Is like, and you know, it's like that's like one of the main aspects. And I don't generally go into like a full blown, completely lethargic kind of depression that some people may have experienced. You know, it's not like a complete loss of everything, but it's still very unstable and very, like, you know, hopelessness is probably the best word to describe it. Just the exact opposite of optimism in any way. I feel like everything that's difficult in my life is only going to get more difficult, and I feel like nobody likes me, and people only, you know, pretend to be nice to me when they do, and a bunch of stuff that just isn't true, and it's all just circles around in my head and makes me feel hopeless in a way. Yeah.
And I think with depression and people who have experiences with depression, I have had long bouts of depression over the course of my life. And I think at those times, things were very dark, things were very hopeless, and I felt very distant from God, and like I didn't matter to anyone around me, and I sure as all be not matter to God. So it's interesting that you speak of this sense of connection, and that even in this very dark place, like you still have what sounds like a grounding wire to something deeper inside of you or around you that is keeping you close to God. Is that right?
It is right, but it's also the hopelessness feeling kind of like feeds into me thinking that I'm just not good enough. I can't be chosen by God because I'm doing everything wrong, and that grounding of faith is still there, but I feel like I don't deserve it, and that that it's not something that. So sometimes I feel like it's not something that's worth striving for in those times, and then there's doubt about that because I feel inadequate, you know.
And that's something that you still hold on to? Like faith is still something that you hold on to in
Yeah,
that time?
it is, but I feel like I shouldn't a lot of the time because I feel like it's something I don't deserve.
That God's grace and forgiveness
Absolutely
is something you don't deserve?
Right.
Or faith is something you don't deserve?
Well, for me they go hand in hand in a way, kind of both, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. Because faith itself grounds me, so I see faith as a gift from God. You know, the fact that there's something that can, you know, I can have hope, you know? So I would say that I feel like I don't deserve to have that grounding when I'm depressive episode a lot of the time. So it's still there, and it's good that it's still there, and it's something that I'm thinking about, but not in a good way because I'm in such a bad headspace, you know? Is that something that you've experienced? when you've been in
Yeah.
depressive episodes?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think, like, in my mind, the word that's coming, the word that's popping out is the word grasp. Like, I think that I'm trying to grasp faith, and I'm not like holding it, but it's just out of reach, and like my fingertips are like just kissing it, just barely touching it, but I
Right.
can't wrap my hand, and let alone myself, around it as a sense of anchor and as a sense of grounding. That's a word that I think has been, I've used it and you used it, and I think that's kind of, yeah, an appropriate way to think about it in like a depressive episode.
Right.
So yeah, and so I mean, when you're in that space, is there anything that you can do, or is there anything that anybody says, or anything that you think about that makes faith more inviting to you in that space, that makes faith, that allows you to feel that comfort, even if it's momentary?
Oftentimes, I will try to, when I know somebody that struggles with depression, and you know, when they're currently struggling with depression, I try to think of what would I want somebody to say to me. And I still find it very difficult, because there's not a lot somebody can say to me, that, you know, because everything somebody says, I'm going to twist it in my head to make it negative somehow. And so it can be really hard to navigate, you know, what to say to somebody. But just saying something and being there for the person is the most important thing. It doesn't matter, as long as there's something that you're doing for the person. And there are quote unquote right and wrong things to say, I guess, you know, it's all subjective, but like saying, I think this is something that you touched upon in the mental health episode with Levi, is being there and saying something to the person. No matter, it's just better than saying nothing. If there are brothers and sisters that struggle with depression that you know of, make it known to them that you are there for them. And that's the most important thing. Probably my favorite thing that you said in that mental health episode was about letting us help you, you know? Right. If you're helping us with our mental health, helps us feel less like a burden in a way to help you back. And just like, I love helping people anyway, so just, you know, that's a very important thing as well. Those are ways that you could be there for me during a depressive episode, I would say.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier in our conversation about something that you're coming to realize is helpful for you, and something that you've been exploring is like opening up to other people. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like sharing, in the spirit of sharing something, a struggle that you have, or something that's going on with your brain chemistry, and how that helps grow faith?
Right. I think one of the main aspects about it for me is that people have heard, not a lot of people have heard of cyclothymia, but people have heard bipolar disorder. You know, most people know that word, but they don't know, there's kind of a stigma around it, and most people don't really know what it consists of. I think a lot of that is because we don't talk about, even though it's very common. I think 1 in 40 or more than 1 in 40 people in America have bipolar disorder, and it's not something that's really discussed a lot, and I think that's why. So for me, when I open up about and explain to people what it is, I feel like I'm helping other people who have that struggle hopefully be more open and not be as afraid to come out as whatever mental illness they may struggle with. You know, because if I'm open about it, then helping other people understand what it is, then hopefully it'll be more inviting for other people to open up about it as well. So there's that. I like for people to understand what's going on in my brain when it comes to something that I can't control, because I do unfortunately think a lot about what other people think about me. I don't want them to think that it's harder for me. I don't want to say that I can't control my actions, but it's harder for me to just do the right thing sometimes, or just sometimes it's harder for me to just act normal, because I don't always feel normal, and I like people to understand that. I think that's what it comes down to a lot of the time.
Yeah, and you have such a thoughtfulness about a lot of things in life, but especially who you are in this present moment. And I think that's something that takes a lot of honing and a lot of practice to be mindful of the words that are coming out of my mouth and the actions that I'm doing. Are these, what are the influences that are going on? And is one of those influences mental health related? You mentioned the phrase out of your control. And I think like with a lot of mental health, it's something that we can't see. It's invisible, minus, brain scans that they might be able to do. But, day in and day out, like you just don't see the shifting tides of chemicals that are going on in your brain.
Yeah.
And that's something that you, as you've, have mentioned, is out of your control. So how does the out of control factor of mental health impact your faith?
Yeah, so that, I guess I would preface that with a couple things. First of all, I would say it's not all just the fact that it's something that you can't see. It's also the fact that how are you supposed to control something cognitively that is affecting you cognitively? Mm-hmm. That is very difficult because, it's very circular, Yeah. It's all just a struggle within your own head, like you can cognitively solve problems that are outside of your own head, but then when you're already impaired cognitively, it's like, it makes it very difficult. And the other thing is that with specifically with mood disorders, while being mental illnesses, they are technically diseases because it is a change in the chemicals in your brain. It is a physical thing in your brain. It's a disease, and it helps to remember that when it comes to anything, when it comes to faith or just anything when I'm trying to stabilize myself. I think you said earlier, it feels like it's like unstable ground that you're standing on. But it helps to remember that it is just a chemical imbalance in my brain, and the things that it's making me think, the almost delusions that I go into in a depressive episode about guilt and inadequacy and stuff like that, that's just the chemicals in my brain making me think that. And that helps a lot, just to remember, this isn't me, this is bipolar. I have bipolar.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned there, and like finding stability, is being able to separate what is brain chemistry coloring in your reality.
Right. Where do I end and where does my disorder begin?
Exactly. Yeah. And some of that can be very black and white, but I think a lot of it's gray. And I think a lot of thoughts can happen in that gray space at either end of rock bottom depression or skyrocketing sleepless nights.
Right.
And especially if somebody has a manic episode or somebody has a very dark, deep, depressive episode and then comes back from that, they often look back at their life. And I can speak from personal experience with some of these pieces. They look back at how they interacted with people they deeply care about, and maybe they said things that they deeply regret, and even still cannot parse through what was mental illness and what was me.
Yeah.
And it's just stuck in the gray. And for me, that's where like faith really plays, I think, an important role. Is the notion, the idea of trust behind faith, and deeply trusting other people to help me interpret, but also deeply trusting God that there will be clarity in the future, and that making sense of all that isn't necessarily so important, possibly.
Well, I don't normally think too much about it. It's more so I'm sort of thankful for the way my mental health is, honestly, even though it's not, I'm not considered mentally healthy, but I'm thankful for that because I think it makes me unique in a way, and I think I experience these unique sensations and unique periods where that a lot of people don't. I try to look on the bright side.
I'm just interested in how your relationship with God in Jesus, how that's impacted by you having moments where you don't know if this is the real Christian.
I do think a lot of the time when I'm in more of kind of like a manic state, that I think of like, I'm usually, because I don't really, with cyclothymia, I don't go into full-blown mania, so when I'm usually stable enough to sort of think like, I wonder how much of this is me. I try my hardest. While it can be hard, I try to direct all that, manic energy into doing what's right, and I'm usually able to do that. And so, instead of thinking too much about what is me and what is not, I try to make what is, not me into what I would want me to do, if that makes sense, Yeah. But then when it does come to that gray area, because it is there. It's like I think about responsibility in a way. It's hard. It's sort of hard because it's like when I'm doing something that's very difficult for me to control. How much of this am I really responsible for in the eyes of God? You know what I mean? And that's like I feel like that's very nuanced and very like a very difficult thing to grasp. Impulsivity is a defining feature of mania and hypomania, and it's like, well, how much of that did I really choose to do? What gives me comfort in that region is the fact that I know that God understands what's going on in my head, and I know He's not going to look at, He's not going to look like from like a human perspective, like, oh,
why are there 47 Amazon Prime boxes at your door?
Yeah, or something maybe more along the lines of like, why did he say that to this person? That was very wrong. It's obviously God understands what's going on in my head, and he knows it's hard, and it's not an excuse, for things that I do that's wrong.
Sure.
But it gives me comfort to know that God doesn't see things from a human perspective. He knows exactly what's going on in my head from a spiritual perspective, and what's in my heart.
Yeah, and are you able to tap into that when you are a low or if you're in a high? Are you able to, in those more extreme places, find that thought and anchor yourself into it?
I think in a depressive episode, I anchor myself too much in that thought, and I think like, man, I am, I do all these things that are so wrong, and I don't think about how like, God understands, like God gets what's going on in my head. I don't think about that. I think, so I anchor myself too much in that kind of thought in a negative way, and then when I'm in more of a manic, amped up state, I think I don't really think about that stuff very much at all. I just think I'm great. I'm the greatest. I can do anything, and
superhero.
Like I'm a superhero. Everything, and like everything's gonna work out, and I feel like super spiritually, like I actually feel like, sometimes I feel like I'm not even human. Like I'm like there's like something more to it, and I feel very spiritually connected and excited about everything, but specifically like excited about my faith, and I try my hardest to direct that into actually doing what's right, instead of thinking that everything I'm doing is right, which is what it often is. It's like thinking everything I'm doing is good, no matter what it is.
Very common to.
But I think I have kind of been able to refine it. I'll anchor a thought in my head where it's like, okay, I should offer to help people with stuff, because like oftentimes if I'm not impulsive, I'm if I use the impulsivity where I'll be like, I'll offer to help somebody later with something, or if it'll be like, if you need any help with this, and then when I'm not in a manic state, then I have that responsibility later to do it, and then so I'm doing something good. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I am able to tap into it.
Okay, can we talk about coming back from a very high spiritual place? So grandiosity is something that's common to manic episodes. Feeling like you are the best version of yourself you have ever been.
Yep.
And feeling and finding it difficult to relate to people.
Yes. That's the bad part. That's like one of the only bad parts, because it's like it's mostly euphoric.
Yeah, right.
And then there's like just kind of like a disconnect from other people is kind of,
But I think there's also an experience that many people have, which is in this very kind of superhero place of mind, faith ignites and is like a wildfire, and you might start to think that you're seeing the finer details around you, and you're interpreting them as spiritual messages,
right?
And like you feel like
it can get dangerous.
And so that, feeling super connected with the divine is a great feeling, but then when people get more sleep, or they get on a medication that brings them to a stable place.
Yeah. Or shift into a depressive episode or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, then you find yourself standing in an entirely different place.
Right.
And in a reality that is less colorful in a faith way. You're very articulate with your experience. And I think I really like that language of like finding yourself, because you're finding yourself a lot with mental illness day by day, but finding yourself standing in the same place, but feeling very different about your faith, and feeling very different about your relationship with God,
Right.
and feeling different about your relationship with other people in a faith way. How do you find like faith equilibrium in this when people are fluctuating from anxious state to not anxious, depressive to not,
Yeah.
Does faith stay the same and it just holds its place, or is it something that's changing dynamically?
Oh, definitely.
Right?
So yeah, I think that it's pretty much impossible for somebody with a mood disorder or disorder characterized by fluctuating moods. At least with bipolar disorder, at least with cyclothymia, it's pretty much impossible to find stability. At least the amount of faith. And I can liken it to somebody who may be mentally healthy or may not have a mental illness. I can liken it to just feeling spiritually high or spiritually low. I see it. It feels the same way in whether I'm in a mood episode or which mood episode I'm in or if I'm not. It's the same sort of spiritual high feeling. It just happens to usually be congruent with whatever mood episode I'm in. Then with a depressive episode, it's like I still believe and have faith, but it's just not a spirit. It's like a spiritual. I don't want to say it's a spiritual low, but it's like a spiritual low. I don't know. But that's not the same for everybody, because I know a lot of people with depression will go into doubt. This is something I probably should have said earlier. That I feel like that's something that's more unique to me, is that a lot of people in depressive episodes just start doubting and lose their faith. But what grounds me personally is the fact that I do always have faith, so I know that no matter where I am, God is always going to be there. Even though I have doubts, as everybody goes through, I know that God will stick with me throughout my life, and that I won't stray away from that. And so that's what grounds me, just remembering that, instead of being like, man, I can't be in a spiritual high. Like it's like almost like a dependence on it. If I'm not if I'm not in a mood episode, it's like a dependence on something like that to have a spiritual high. And what kind of grounds me from that is the fact that like it's always something that will be there. God will always be there. My faith will always be there. So that's what grounds me in faith, with these spiritual highs and lows and all that.
Can you remember, or do you know the time when that thought sparked and has stuck about God always being with you, and you having that and holding on to it throughout in all times, kind of thing?
Yeah, it was actually it was a more recent thing, just as like my mental health journey really has been. It was something more recently that I recognized, and it was while I was doubting that I recognized it, and it was while I was in a depressive state that I recognized it, because I remember doubting, but then I remember thinking, I've gone through this before, and these doubts always subside and are they're overridden by the amount of faith that I have. That's always what ends up happening, and so I know that I just cannot see it in my future, no matter what state I'm in. And this isn't the same for everybody, but for me, no matter what state I'm in, I can never see a future where I stray away from God. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but I'm lucky enough that that I feel stability with that, and not everybody can say that, especially not people who have unstable moods. So I would consider myself lucky in that sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like you peered through the cyclical, the dynamic, the rustling motion of it all. You like peered through it all, like backwards and forwards, and you said, "This is coming back. I know it's coming back, but like I am making this. I'm kind of like inscribing this. I'm thinking of like a graffiti artist, like on a you know, on an important wall, saying like he is with me, or God like is still there." And that's something that you kind of keep coming back to in, you know, in these shifting places of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, so many people will go into way worse episodes of depression than me, or even it could even be like the same, and just experience it differently. The way that these illnesses affect people, you know, it affects people in different ways. So I don't want, you know, I don't want people to think that everybody with bipolar disorder or depression or whatever, you know, has the same experiences as me. But I consider myself lucky to always feel grounded within faith with what I struggle with.
So there could be people listening to this who they themselves may have some lived experience with a mental health challenge, or they have a loved one, a dear loved one, who experiences a mental health challenge to some degree. What would you say to those people listening about faith?
I would say understand that, you know, at least when it comes to mood disorders, I can't speak quite as much for something along the lines of a personality disorder, but you know, just with mood disorders, it's not. Try to look past the disorder as much as possible. Not when trying to help the person, but you know, when trying to connect with the person, because that person is still in there. You know, even though sometimes it may feel like an empty shell, or it may feel like somebody that you know, it's like not even who they are. You know, no matter what side it's on. Just remember that person is still in there, and that and think of it that way. You know, all of their experiences and whatever is in their heart, it's hard. It may be harder for them to do what they want to do in their heart, but their heart functions in a different way than their mind does sometimes, and I think that's what it comes down to with mental health a lot of the time, is that you want to do the right thing, and it's not always easy. After actually living through the experience and understanding, you know, it can be hard for the person to act like who they truly are. Personally, I struggle with, like you said, looking back and looking at the ways that I acted during these, you know, during whatever mood episode, and I'm like, man, I really wish I didn't do that, and I want people to see me for who I am and not what I do that I don't want to do. I want people to see what's in my heart. So just, while it may be hard to do, and while it's a struggle to go through, remember that person is still there, who your loved one is still there, and if it's yourself, you are, you know, you're still there. Like you're still, like your soul is separate from your mind, you know, and that's true for everybody. That's true for people who don't have mental health, you know, problems. Your spirit, what's in your heart, is separate from your flesh, you know. That's the way I see it.
You said something very powerful that I think everybody needs to hear, that, you know, because you know, everybody has times where they feel like, oh, like that wasn't me, or this isn't me. Whether it's you're in a relationship that is you pulling out different sides of you that you weren't expecting, or you find yourself in this situation or that. But just to hear that, like, you're still there, like you're still in there. I think that is such a powerful voice of faith. Like that is you showing exercise of having faith in this other person or in yourself. And I think that's something that we should say more often.
I often think about, on this topic, I think about a verse in, I believe, Romans 7. Paul says something along the lines of, I want to do what is good, but I don't have the ability to carry it out, or something along those lines, you know? But then, and he says something like, but that's not me when I don't do what is right, you know? Like that's so powerful. That's one of my favorite passages. It's not me doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not an excuse, and but it's absolutely true that if you are filled with the Spirit of God, then you truly do want to do what is right. And no matter what it is, whether it's mental health or anything that makes, you choose to do what is wrong, you still know that what you're doing is wrong, and you didn't actually want to do it. Yeah. But your brain, your flesh tricked you into thinking that that's what you wanted to do. That, I think, encompasses mental health and so many other things so well.
There's a beautiful bridge here from the beginning of our conversation when you were talking about being in a low, brought down place and not feeling like grace and forgiveness were accessible. Mm-hmm. And here what you're talking about is grace and forgiveness. Yeah. Like that's what you're talking about.
Yep.
Like right now, like granting yourself and granting another the grace just to be, and the forgiveness to let go of the pieces that you're holding on to that might be regrets, or that might be, I didn't want to do that, right? Like that's what you're talking about right now.
Yep, absolutely. And I think everybody can relate to that. Well, I think we discussed before the podcast that you would mention the nice attire that I'm wearing today.
Oh.
You did not bring that up. I wore a suit just for the podcast to find out that there's no cameras. No, that's not true.
Christian's wearing a suit.
Yeah.
There you go. He looks very chic. Jose is proud of you.
Yeah, I heard he is. I heard. Thank you, Jose. Everyone go listen to Jose's episode if you haven't already.
Well, thanks, Christian. It's been great.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you
Pleasure.
So much for having me on. I had a good time.
Great. Tune in next week.
Hello, this is Tom from the Platform, a Christadelphian podcast that tackles challenging topics and how we talk about them. Our aim is to bring self-awareness to the debate in the Christadelphian community and instill good conversation through listening techniques. You can find us on all good podcasting platforms, and we are proudly supported by the WCF. We look forward to you joining the conversation. If you have any comments or questions, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook.